So thank you, Qpert, for dropping by and agreeing to be on my stream today. Big fan. Obviously, we worked together for a while, a bit on C9. But why don't you introduce yourself? Let's tell everyone like who you are, how long you've been playing, and a little bit about your history.
I'm Qpert. I am the IGL for SK. Last year I was in C9, worked with my boy right here. Other than that, I've been playing the game since it came out. I don't have much esports experience before that. I played Overwatch when I was young, but my parents didn't really let me play games, so that was kind of the problem. But
So,
since
wait,
I'm a grown up, I've been grinding.
when did you start like playing consistently? Would you say like you got your own PC and all that?
Okay, well, technically, I played World of Warcraft since I was 4 years old. I
Okay,
was playing Arena with my grandma and my grandpa. That's the true story. When I was
that's
4.
awesome.
But then I moved countries, and then I wasn't allowed to play as much. Blah blah blah. I probably started playing, yeah, when I was 16. I think
Okay.
when Valorant came out specifically, 16 turning 17.
Okay, so Valorant was really your first game that you were grinding competitively as first FPS you were grinding competitively, or you play CS and all that first?
Even when I didn't have a PC, like I could play on sometimes like 3 hours a day maybe. I was
Mhm.
playing Overwatch. I reached top 500 when I was 13,
And that's playing a
and I
couple
was
hours a day. That's not
Yeah, no,
that's
I was
not
a talent.
grinding.
I don't know where that talent disappeared, but I was a talent in the beginning. I was playing Lucio and Ana. I reached top 500. I was playing on like 50 FPS, like awful setup. I had
Oh
like a
man.
glass desk, and my parents bought me a TV because they didn't want me to buy. They didn't want to buy a monitor for some reason. They bought me a TV. They put it so far they didn't want me to be close, and I had like an indent in my chest of like a red line from the glass table because I was just like
That's
TV was so
hilarious.
far, so I had to like go into it.
That's
So yeah, fun
hilarious.
times.
Yeah. I
But
love
they
hearing
ruined the game.
I love hearing like pro players how they started, and it's
Yeah,
funny because in esports it's like it's so similar to actually a lot of just regular people. Like we
yeah,
all started playing games like that. I remember like when I was a kid, I would play and my mom would never let me game, but we had a computer, so it was like I always had to figure out how to play more when she wouldn't want me
yeah,
to. Like you got to sneak time in. But that's crazy. There's definitely, I do believe, okay, also caveat, I do believe in talent. I do believe that some people's brains are wired differently. And that's why a lot of people who go pro or able to get to pro are oftentimes, they haven't, I don't want to say easier time, but they have a more smooth time getting there than a lot of other people. Like
yeah.
the top 1% of the ladder did not struggle nearly as hard as 90% of the ladder to get to the rank that they're at.
I think so. I think I could turn on half the games, especially if it's an FPS game, and in 3 months be top 1%.
That's
And I have
crazy.
friends who are struggling for months and they can't. And I don't even think I'm the most talented. I have players who like save leaf. These players like
I
leaf, bro. I don't know,
I
the
was
most
I was gonna
unbelievable
mention
talent
Leaf.
ever.
Yeah, a lot of
Like that guy,
dude,
anything he touches.
most pros I've talked to, especially in NA, when you bring up Leaf, they get so annoyed because they're like this guy like, and it's I don't want to knock on, but like he doesn't practice nearly as much. He doesn't grind
Yeah.
nearly as much as any other pro. Like the guy barely plays Valorant, and he's just like top 1% of pro. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I've learned
there's
a lot watching him. Like I learned why he's a passive learner, man.
yeah.
I used to say to him a lot, like I don't know how good you are, like you're lucky, like you're just talented, you're lucky, it's gonna go off sooner or later. I used to tell him that, and then with time, like just watching him, like I figured out that he just passively learns. Like you don't even notice he's like on his phone watching games,
Hmm.
but the way he watches games, like out of the whole team we had, he was the most knowledgeable by far about other teams, even more than me. I watched every single game
Mhm.
to Anti. He knew some things I didn't notice, and I was like, "When did you even watch?" Like I didn't even see you on your
Hmm.
PC. He's like, "Oh yeah, when I was in bed, like before eating, I was in bed for like 20 minutes. I just watched the game." And like the guy just like so it's passive, like random bits of learning.
So
So
it's
there's
almost
always
like intuitive, right? Like like some
yeah,
people can listen to music and they can play it. They just
yeah,
understand it. They understand it at an intuitive level. That's really interesting because I definitely think there's a lot of people like that in well, there's not a lot. There's a few people like that in esports across different games that I've met who oftentimes get a reputation like, oh, they're lazy or whatever, but they're not lazy. They oftentimes learn differently and
yeah.
they might be able to learn more efficiently. So him watching VODs on his phone might actually be better for him than him playing 10 games of ranked.
No,
Yeah.
no. I also do. I also am realizing there is some benefit about like the balance.
Hmm.
like just playing less and playing better.
Hmm.
It's one of those things I struggle with. I'm obsessed with like playing the most. Like on every team I've been on, my goal was always to have the most games played.
Yeah.
It's always been my goal on every single team.
Well,
And for the last
even
year,
I mean, I was even when you were coaching last year,
yeah, I had a lot
I
of it.
had to tell you like, hey, maybe you shouldn't play so much. Like,
Yeah,
maybe you need to take a few hours off of rank because like you were grinding too. You were hitting radiant. You were
yeah,
like there was no reason for you to be grinding that much as a coach, but you were doing it. Like, and I think I mean there's something admirable about that too because you obviously understand the game at a very tangible level because your hands are on it, right? Like you're playing it,
yeah.
you're seeing the patch. Um, but let's talk about that. So when you were coming up, right, when you went pro for the very first time, like you started getting into the pro scene, what do you think you did differently than a lot of people in the space that are trying to go pro? Like what got you there?
Okay, I actually do have some things about this which most people don't understand. When I was, as I said, like I didn't have the circumstances. I think people don't realize that esport is a rich man sport. Similar to like there's a difference between playing soccer, at least in Europe, and playing tennis and playing like quote unquote rich man sports where
Hmm.
it takes more money, more support from family. For example, esports is in a way where I don't think somebody who has to live paycheck to paycheck can actually survive in esports. Because for you to stay in the tier 2 scene, you have to be okay with not getting paid for months at a time.
Yeah.
Clubs leave, clubs scam you, clubs disappear, clubs get kicked out of leagues, whatever
Hmm.
it is. When I was coming up, I was just like relentless, let's just say, like call it that. I always knew I wanted to play professionally. When Valorant came out, I loved the game. I hated school, so I just put like, I didn't sleep. I was always playing, always watching VODs at school, and then I went specifically for an IGL early on. I'm not sure why I did that, but early on I realized I wanted to be an IGL. Maybe because of my background in sports, I played basketball on a decent level, and I was always like the captain of the team. Because the coaches liked me for my like, I was kind of an example because I was
Hmm.
always grinding. So I was kind of a good example to the rest of the team. That kind of led me into IGLing.
Hmm.
But the one thing that probably helped me go pro was I have a lot of friends who had like 2 months of no tryouts, and they would just sit there and just wait for a tryout. They would just play and do what they're already doing and just hope magically something appears.
Hmm.
The way I got into my first team was I DM'd every person in my rank. I played ranked. I found decent people who were nobodies, added them, making more. I had like 10 people that I kind of thought were good, invited all of them. Let's play scrims, figured out what that even means, asked people what it even means, and then slowly, like I got a kind of a team, which was just us five friends playing, and I went to a tournament in Germany. We got second place, and I got my first offer where I got paid like maybe $200 a month, like something like small. And then it started like that. Like
Yeah.
that's how it started. I was one of the only people who I was the direct reason. Like I made a team, and most people don't do it that way. They just wait for somebody to contact them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I think that's the biggest difference that I did
So
from most people.
yeah, that's really interesting because now with Ascension, right, and the way that it's developed, there's sort of a direct pathway put in front of you. It still almost requires you to do what you're talking about. You got to put together a premier team. You got to win premier. You got to do all this stuff. You
Yeah.
got to get into challengers, right? So, how do you feel about the Ascension model and how it's been?
It's pretty decent. I do like that they're innovating of like going pro. I think like when I watch other games like CS and stuff, it's not
Hmm.
as it's kind of random. I think there's a lot more randomness to it. Here, you make a premier team and you just win. And if you
Hmm.
win, you go to VCL. And if you're in VCL, like if you're in challengers, you just try to win to go to Ascension. I do think the system now, with the changes of this year, is getting a bit worse. Personal opinion. I don't know if you've seen the updates of like um, they're not gonna keep adding teams. I was told we were supposed to go up to like 14, 15, 16 teams
Yeah.
one
You
day.
you mean in the VCT level?
Yeah,
Yeah.
now it's not
Yeah.
like that. It's only 12, and it's gonna be maxed out at 12 for a long time.
Mhm.
That's the update from this year, which means a team that qualifies to VCT. So let's say in NA, let's make NA as an example. We have
Sure.
B2, and let's say M80 qualifies, right? Now, next year, the whichever one of them is worse will play the Ascension teams
Right.
to refight for the slot, which I personally believe is unfair, especially in Europe. For the reason in Europe, if you're in tier two, you need to have what is called LTR slots, which is you need to have 3 players who come from that region. So, for example, I'm in SK. We need 3 Germans. because it's a German org. We play in German league,
Mhm.
so we need to have 3 Germans on the team. But the tier one team that drops down to relegation, for example, Apex. Let's say Apex wins this year. Next year, it's between them and Gentlemates. Whoever is the worst team has to pay relegation. They don't have an LTR rule. They can have
Mm,
5 players, whoever they want. Any team I speak to in tier 2 in Europe, they don't have the perfect team they want. There's always 1 or 2 players that they only got them because they need them to fill in the requirements of the team.
right.
So thinking about even SK, we didn't get 5 players who we wanted specifically. We had to like look into like we need German specifically, we need this specifically, and whatever. So it does
Mm.
kind of pose, in my opinion, a competitive integrity in Europe, where not only does the tier one team who plays relegation have money from the bundle, so straight up money from Riot, and they also have like no LTR rule. So I do think from this update, a lot of tier two teams in Europe are going to leave for this reason, because you just are put in a huge disadvantage from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, would the solution be to open rosters for challenger teams, or would it be to impose roster limitations on the VCT teams?
Just open, just fully open it. I don't think it's useful anymore.
Yeah.
1 second. I don't think it's useful anymore. Just fully
Yeah.
open it. I think, or at least make it like 1 player. One
I,
player is
I I
fine. You
think
can get
I'd be
away with
okay.
that.
What if they opened it to like regional, right? Like if you're in Europe, that should count, right? You shouldn't have like let's say that you're a challenger team, you shouldn't be able to import 5 Korean players in Europe.
Yeah, of course.
Right, like, it
I
should be
think that's how
region
it works.
locked.
Yeah,
Yeah, you should
yeah,
have
like
to have
America.
at least 4 of your players need to be from Europe, and then the other one, whatever. But
Yeah,
I think in Americas, we don't see that as much of a problem because, yeah, there's sort of there's enough talent in North America, there's enough talent in Brazil, there's enough talent in LatAm that they can make their own teams right now. I personally think it's going to shift. I think it's going to become oversaturated in one direction because a lot of the best talent is already in VCT, right? From Brazil, LATAM, all that. Like
yeah,
it's going to get worse and worse, the disparity between the top and the bottom, because Brazil and LATAM, they just don't have the player base to
yeah,
sustainably promote a new OSPOS every year. They can't do that, right?
yeah,
And in North America, it's almost the opposite problem. There's too many players that could honestly be in tier one that are stuck and never get their shot. That there's a lot of people that are going to quit, but it's like how do you balance that? I think VCT Americas is probably the best possible example of how Ascension should go. You had G2 or the guard come up, they win their slot. They do fantastic, right? They get second place
yeah,
2 stages in a row. They make it to top 4 at champs. I mean, that's the dream of any Ascension team to,
yeah,
to get to. I think it sets a model because now in Americas, the competition level to go to Ascension is insanely high. Everyone wants it because they're like, look at what the guard did. We could have done that. And realistically, M80 last year probably could have been more favored than the guard, even. Like they were, I think, a better team, like through most of challengers. Um, but in Europe, it seems to be like, okay, what I actually, so I don't watch, I'll be honest, I don't watch a lot of EMEA Ascension or anything. Like, are the teams there, would you say they're comparable to the VCT level teams, or would
not
you
even
say,
close.
okay,
Only one is kind of close, and they have 5 players, or sorry, 4 players who used to be tier one.
got it.
They
Okay.
have like 4 like used to be tier one players who got kicked out of it. The other teams, I mean, it's obviously I'm not saying it is a bad thing, but I don't think they're close enough. And even Gentlemates who qualified last year struggled a lot.
Yeah,
There were 3 teams in Europe on the bottom. They all were equally bad, not in a bad way, but the bottom 3 teams were just equal.
yeah,
And like
yeah,
one of them was the Ascension team. They were struggling.
right.
And then here we also have a problem similar like to America. For
Mhm.
example, Nettlemate was a French org, so they kept French players and they have French fan base. So it does complicate a bit of like the structure of teams and talent. Like if you're born, like for example, the Russian players struggle a lot in Europe because you know how I told you there's like the whole LTR system where
Mhm.
in tier two you need 3 players. Russians don't count for any region. So any
Ah,
team who wants to get a Russian kind of has to like you can get 2 Russians and then you have to have 3 from your own country. So if you're a
ah,
Russian, you are the like last slot, and if you're an org, from experience, the first person getting kicked is the international player because they cannot kick a player from their own country if they
right.
don't have another one to replace them. So it's a lot more like who gets the better spawn. Like literally, who gets a better spawn in
Yeah.
Europe for the LTR system? Like even the average salaries in Germany, the average salaries are blown out so much. There's not enough German talent. So the German talent that, like, let's say there's 15 good players, not
Hmm.
even 10. You if you're a good team, you need three of them. So now all the good orgs in Germany are arguing for like 10 players. So their salary goes way above average. Like
Wow.
the salary in Germany is way higher than salaries in like East. In East, you have a big player pool, Poland, Serbia, everything, like all of East of Europe. So the average salary in that country is half. Like in that whole region is not even half, less than half, because there's more pool. So you don't have to like actually offer a guy 4 or 5 thousand to play, which is like way above average wage in your
Hmm.
country. So Europe is a bit more interesting. I don't think there's a real fix to it, personally, but I do think opening up the LTR to at least like maybe two, you need two players. That's okay, but having the majority, it's a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, even just dropping one of the required slots drastically changes
Yeah,
the issue you're describing. I never even considered, yeah, the financial implication because you're right. If you're a French team and you have to have 3 French players, I mean, that's really hard to find 3 tier 2, tier 1 players that can not only they have to be French, they have to be able to work together. Like,
yeah. They have to
just
not
because they're
hate each
French,
other.
yeah, it doesn't
Yep.
mean that they're gonna get along.
Uh,
Like, that's really hard to actually construct a competitive roster. Yeah, that's really interesting because that long term is going to pose problems, especially with teams if they find that, hey, we're from a smaller region. It's really hard for us to field a competitive team, especially in Ascension. You're not making money in Challenger. It may
yeah,
not be worth it. And
yeah,
I do think Europe is gonna have to figure that one out sooner rather than later. And I also kind of want to talk a little about Europe as a whole. Do you think this is partially why Europe as a region has looked, in my opinion, weaker? I know they just made top 2 at champs, but as a region, it seems like Europe really fell off a bit from last year and the year before. Like, you know, I remember like the first few years of Valorant competitive, it was like TL, Fnatic, like these teams were world class. And now it's like Europe feels like kind of a, there's 2 good teams, but I wouldn't say Fnatic played better than half of the teams at champs or even
yeah.
Heretics the first half of the event. They didn't look great. They looked okay.
I think at the moment, obviously, like me as a quote unquote tier two player now saying this, it's funny. I
No, you can,
can't really have an opinion, but I have an opinion. Okay, I do have an opinion. I think the coaches were didn't do a good job.
yeah.
I'm not saying the coaches are bad. I just think the coaches didn't do a good job this year. Heretics did an amazing job. Karmine Corp did a really good job, but they could have done better. Karmine Corp, to me, that Karmine Corp roster, Martin and Narrate in one team is a cheat code. Like that is unbelievable. Like basically, I do think the teams didn't do that good job building, and the two teams who took the most young players did the best by far, not even
Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
The teams who recycle players didn't do well. I do think that's one problem. Second problem is our IGLs. And now that might be sound different because I'm saying it as an IGL in tier two, so it does sound like I'm crying a bit maybe. But we had a problem, in my opinion, where we recycle a lot of IGLs. We made a lot of non-IGLs into IGLs. And I don't mind that at all. I do think some IGLs have a potential, like some normal players, like just a random player, has the potential to be an IGL. But I do think we tried it too hard. Like so many non-IGLs last year turned into IGLs. I'll give an example. Apex was our runner-up Ascension team.
Mm.
Okay? Runner-up. Three of their players became IGLs in tier 1. Now, somebody tell me the maths. How three players from one team who were second best in tier two, like unbelievable team, like they were incredible. I think they could have played in tier one that year. Three of them become IGLs in tier one. In which, in which
Okay.
world?
Which teams did they go to?
You have Enzo on Liquid, you had Magnum on KC, and you had Shadow on Koi.
Yeah. So out of all 3 of those, only one kind of showed up, right? Like as an IGL. I feel like we actually saw this in Americas too. When players switch to the IGL role, there's a drop off, a massive drop off in not only their performance but team performance for a little bit. Even Leviathan, right? They won Americas at the end. You look at the first stage during kickoff and all that; they were all over the place because King was starting to IGL. Never really done it before. There was a lot of weird decision making mid game. There's a lot of confusion as they play, and they kind of figured it out by the end, which is what you want to see. But other teams never did, right? Crew swapped their IGL mid season. because they had who is it? Klaus IGLing, and then they switched to
Yeah,
Melzer, and like it was just there was a lot of chaos at the IGL position. When I think it was also Furia. There's a bunch of teams when they switch their IGL, especially when they're not bringing in an established IGL. They're bringing in someone who is a
yeah,
duelist or who's a sentinel player. Now they're going to IGL as well. You detract from their performance in their previous role, and then you're adding on a whole new skill set that they've never honed, they've never developed, they never really worked on, right? Like as an IGL yourself, and I actually don't think that you shouldn't downplay your thoughts on this stuff because you're in tier 2 or
yeah,
whatever, right? It doesn't change the fact that you can look at something and be like, "Oh, this was a mistake." Or you could look at, a coaching staff and be like, "Oh, this comp didn't make sense," right? That's analysis, right? Like as a freaking silver peaker myself, like I don't know Valorant at a technical level, but I know humans and I know personality. I can see enough team dynamics at the tier 1 level to say this team is not functioning well. I don't think it's a rank or
yeah.
it's not a requirement to say like your opinion's wrong in that because you can see it. And if you worked in the space, which you have, right? You were coaching at the tier 1 level. I mean, you can see when a team is not functioning correctly on stage. You can tell when the communication isn't there. You can tell when like someone is clearly calling a play and then half the team does it and the other two players are like dicking around
Yeah.
on the other site. Like they don't know what they're doing. Like,
I think I also know where the problem comes from. Like
mhm,
to me, the players are not at fault at all.
mhm.
Zero. I think the players are set up to fail. Putting a half of these players on an ideal role, you are risking their career at that moment. Where if they don't manage, they're probably not gonna get offered as an ideal or as a player anymore because their performance dropped off and they are not good enough ideal. So you just fully kill their career almost. I do think it's a very big mistake. Now, I don't think it's the player's fault. I don't fully think it's the coach's fault. I think it's just the game is young, people see somebody performing very well on their role and they have good comms and they have good calls sometimes. So then you tell them, okay, you ideal. What happens now is for a whole month, I fully believe this, half the players I know, I have from every team, I can say Zels in all Cloud9, Zelsis could ideal, Leaf could ideal, like for a month with no drop off performances and just calling decent, good enough.
So back to that conversation and like, yeah, another example would be Ethan, right? Ethan started IGLing for NRG and honestly, they look like a mess like all year. And then they subbed him out, they put FNS in, couldn't fix it. So an FNS is an experienced IGL, obviously he's taken time off, so he's just not been in pro for a while. But I can definitely see that because again, if you take your star duelist and you put them in an IGL role, they're not going to operate as a duelist the same way. They,
Yeah,
they just can't. You're losing the ceiling that you had on a player and trying to add on something else that they didn't have before, and you're guessing whether or not they can do it. So I definitely think, yeah, that's a good point. Is it's maybe not any one player's fault. It's not the coach's fault necessarily because I'm sure it's a collaborative decision. It's not like
yeah,
the org said, "Oh, you have to IGL now." It was probably
yeah.
kind of volunteer. But how do orgs then better construct their rosters around that? Like how what's a better option?
I just try out more ideals, man. Like every year that at least in Europe, not many ideals are getting trials from tier two.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're individually not performing well in tier two. So you're
Yeah.
saying, okay, you're not performing well in tier two, which means you're not gonna perform. You're gonna perform even worse in tier one. That's their
Right.
logic, right? But that's not true. If I put half the ideals in VCT right now into tier 2, they will perform the same if not worse because tier 2 is more random. I think a lot of people don't understand that tier 2 and tier 1 is like basketball in NBA and basketball in Europe.
Mhm.
It's a same sport, different game. Same sport, different game. Like I believe that I would ideal better in tier 1 than in tier 2. I've seen
Well,
tier
yeah.
1. I've scrimmed a lot with the tier 1 guys in Cloud9 when I was supposed to play for the large trans qualifier.
Mhm.
But the difference is huge. It's a different game. So I do think, for example, if we did thought this way, where like, oh, they're playing individual bad in tier 2, they're not gonna play better in tier 1. I wish we put Poster, Angel, all these legendary ideals into tier 2, I believe individually they will perform the same, if not worse.
Yeah.
None of them will perform much better. So, and when I tell this to coaches, they actually agree with me. They're like, yeah, I don't think they will perform better. I'm like, okay. So if your logic is they won't perform better, why are you discriminating against the tier 2 ideals for not like
Well,
fitting on these tier
i
2 players? Like there's, you
if
know?
if if we're gonna look at the track record in VCT Americas, right? Like top 2 IGLs for this year, maybe like at some point you got John QT, was in tier 2. Valen, probably the best IGL in the league,
Yeah.
came up through tier 2. Like all these guys like showed the ability to do that at a tier 2 level. And they weren't necessarily the best in tier 2, but the way that they can adjust. And I also think that goes back to your point that like people who aren't historically IGLs haven't done it for very long. The drop off in their IGLing also probably comes because as the season goes on, as the stage goes on, teams are counter stratting. They're starting to come up with new ways to
Yeah.
play against you. And if you're an IGL who doesn't have a really deep repertoire in your arsenal to be able to adapt to that, you're not sure what to do because you're like, oh, I was calling this way, and now they've counter stratted it. I don't know what to adjust, and now you're
Yeah.
kind of stuck. And then you're going to see a drop off in both your calling and in team performance, and that makes a lot of sense too because like someone who's IGL'd their whole career is used to adapting on that stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're coming into a round and you're seeing some new setup that you haven't seen before, you're going to be able to better adapt than someone who is starting to IGL for the first time that month.
Yeah. I mean, my goal once I go tier one, which I'm sure I will, I'm still like by far one of the younger IDL whoever got tryouts in tier one.
Yeah.
I was the youngest coach ever in tier one, by the way, like not even close. I know I'm gonna go tier one. I'm very confident because I'm very ethic.
Mm-hmm.
My goal once I go tier one is to establish some specific roles. So I will give an explanation. I think there's a difference between IGL. IGL is a whole thing combined. In-game leading, being a leader in general, being a caller early round, and being a mid rounder. You're doing most of it. You're doing most of lifting of all three. For example, FNS, I think is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
You have shot callers. Shot callers are there's regions especially who have it more. I'll give a random example because I don't want to like throw people under the bus. So let me
Yeah.
say PaperRex is an example. I don't think one guy in that team calls beginning. Let's start 1-3-1, and then mid round say let's go A split. Can you do this? Can you do that? They're not. They're just one guy probably says let's go towards B, and then whoever in the round gets an idea, he says let's do this.
So
So to me,
PaperX is
it
a really good example actually because they're a team that doesn't have an IGL.
yeah, technically
Yeah.
they don't have an ideal.
Yeah.
So to me, there's no wrong way to do it. I see Valorant right now being able to have one ideal and four shooters. This is
Mm-hmm.
Fnatic
Mm-hmm.
or old energy. One like IGL who does all of it. He doesn't do it alone. I know Crash Sheet, for example, calls a shit ton, but he has the responsibility of being the best mid rounder and the best early round caller as he can be. It's his job to learn how to early call and how to mid round as much as he can, and individually hold his ground a bit. You have an IGL. You have a shot caller. These are players who only call early round. Now, there are teams like that. I'm not gonna say which teams because I don't want to throw people under the bus. They have one guy calling early who says let's do this default, and they have somebody else mostly doing the mid rounding. So you have teams like this, and then that's totally fine. The way Valorant should be described, you have an IGL, or you have a shot caller and a mid rounder as two separate roles.
Mm-hmm.
Zelsis is a perfect mid rounder, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
This guy he can't early call that well. I ain't gonna lie, bro. He knows, okay? He can see this. He's my boy. But his mid round is unbelievable. If I have Zelsis, I don't mind not having a real ideal. I wouldn't put FNS and Zelsis in the same team.
Right.
I want Zelsis to have like space to mid round because that's what he brings to the team. So I would want somebody maybe better individual than FNS and to specifically early round call. And there's players for this. For example, a lot of these IGLs in Europe, in my opinion, they got transferred into full IGL, but they would be perfect mid rounders or perfect early rounders, but
Mm.
not both. So a lot of these players could have been like, for example, I'll give you an example. Carmen Corp. I'm not sure what went wrong, but when watching them, you could tell that they're not core. Yeah, mid rounding was bad on Karmic Corp. That's all. Just straight up mid rounding was bad. It doesn't mean it's Magnum's fault because he was ideal. It doesn't mean it's the coach's fault. It doesn't mean it's the I don't know whose fault it is. In my opinion, if I was building Karmic Corp, like Magnum as a Sentinel player, he used to be, he would be very good at early round calling, no question. And I would bring somebody else to mid round. And now Magnum would keep his level as a Sentinel, an early round call. This guy would keep his level as a smoker, flasher, and mid round call, and they would just it would be smooth. That's just my opinion. So there
Yeah.
is a way of playing Valorant like that.
It, it,
I
it's
know
like it's
long,
like division of labor, right? You don't have to
yeah,
watch as much VODs if you're not doing the entire game of
yeah,
calling. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. I don't think a lot of fans know that. I don't think a lot of fans think of like the IGL role as anything beyond you are the shot caller the entire time. And it
Yeah,
sounds
yeah,
like that's not
it's
necessarily true. Yeah.
it's not true on any team, bro.
Yeah.
Every team, like, if you ask, like, how much, like, nobody's gonna say it as well. It's a touchy subject, but like, if you're gonna ask, like, how much does this IGL call on this team? How much does this IGL call on this team? I think in years we're gonna come to a point where coaches are gonna look at. My coach was looking at it. How many action calls you make, not how many comms you have. People yap. Yapping, not
Yeah.
making comms.
Yeah.
But for example, how many times do they let's do this, can you do this,
Mhm.
flash from here? Those are action callouts. I think at like long in few years, the way we're gonna try out people is gonna see how many active callers do they have, what role does it fit? Does it fit the mid rounder? Does it fit early round caller? And we're gonna have teams who have an IGL who does all of that and then plays a bit shit individually because you cannot do fucking everything,
Right.
and you're gonna have players who like do early round but they perform, or do mid round they perform, and you're gonna build teams like this. To me, that's how you build teams to this day, and there's no wrong in that. But I think right now people are just throwing everybody into an IGL role. Everybody's called an IGL. They're not even leaders. They're not even anything.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's changing a bit of the
Uh,
system.
I think you're describing the esports problem as a whole, which is not specific to Valorant. It's the fact that most esports orgs, the way they construct a team, is not from the perspective of how is this team going to operate together as a unit. It's always who are the best players I can find to plug into this position.
Yeah,
It's like, can we find 5 of the best players and put them all together and then try to make it work between all of them? Versus a very structured way of looking at it is, well, maybe if you have an IGL who is capable of calling the entire game, maybe you plug that and you build around that. But you're saying that there's a contrast when you start putting 2 IGLs together or 2 players together who are both very early round specialized, and then you get 3 other players who maybe don't know how to do that. Like, there's just not a lot of actually in my there's not a lot of thought and team building when it comes to any of that in any game.
yeah.
Like, I think most of the
Just the
time.
best coaches. The
Yeah,
best coaches have it. Like MC was one
yeah,
of the people who, like, I think he built great. Like, I know this guy knows what he's doing. And there's other coaches who are like, I fully respect they can do it. I don't think everybody understands, or they put trust in a player and he doesn't do it,
yeah,
or the player actually put trust in the coaches and they don't do their job in teaching them. I can never blame anybody because I'm in no team. We will
yeah,
never know. But the only thing I wish this game does is I can't stand people being called, oh, what is Zelsis? Oh, he's a flex player. Okay, just a flex player. Like, if you ask me to describe Zelsis as a player, I'm saying flex player, good leader, like the veteran of a team, and also like the booster of a team. He boosts any team he's
yeah,
on. The team will play better because of his thing, and a mid rounder. Like,
yeah,
that's how I describe a player. How you ask most coaches to describe a player, it would be just like he's a flex, good, shoots good. The way I
yeah.
see the game, it's very simple because I watch basketball. I compare Valorant to basketball one
Mhm,
to one,
mhm.
because when you watch basketball, one of the most winning teams of all time in like Warriors, for example, they don't have five best players on the court at the same time. You have to have one vet, you have to have one star, you build around like the cohesion of a team, because not everybody can have impact at the same time.
Right.
You can't have five shooters. Like, I always see in my head, I think very weird and imagery in my head. I see a bar, like I see bars that have to be filled for you to have a good roster. You need aim, like to be filled up. You need like team decision to be filled up, and individual decision. Three things that make you a good team, in my opinion: team decision, individual decision, and shooting. If you have an ideal, he will just fully fill up your team decision all the way up here. And he will help with individual decisions if he micromanages. Can you do this? Can you do that? He will drop the shooter like bar down, the mechanics. So you need the rest of the team. So you balance it. You just
Mhm.
balance it. If you have a mid rounder and an early rounder in the same team, they will both half and half fill in the team part, half and half. They will half and half fill in the individual part, and then they will half and half fill the shooting part, because they should be individually better because they're not doing everything.
Right.
You need to fill all the bars, like average them out a bit. To me,
Yeah.
that's the reason with PaperRex struggling their whole life. One of their bars is like overfilled, bro. Their aim just up like over.
Mhm.
Their other bars are not filled enough. That's why they never could get the last.
That's funny. That's what my girlfriend just started watching Valorant and she loves PaperX, and I'd always say they're never gonna win championships. They're always gonna do well until they get into playoffs. And then when
Yeah,
teams start actually stratting specifically for them, they're always going to struggle. And you see it all the time where they get into these deep runs in playoffs and then they just don't know what to do when the team has countered their strategy, and then they're trying to improvise in the middle of the game to figure out how
Yeah.
to beat it. It's really hard to do that. And we've all been in there, and like when you're in a ranked game and you guys are just getting smashed, like, and you're trying to figure out how do you beat this with your team, and you don't know, like, it's too chaotic.
Yeah.
Like it's
I mean,
I've always said they're
the,
always going to do well because they're really really good, but I don't think they're going to win championships. They're not going to win domestically against Genji. They're not going to win abroad against most of the teams that are in the top tier in VCT.
it's none of the players' fault or the coach's fault. That's
No.
what makes me sad. All those players are incredible, but I
Yeah.
question if you remove one of their players and you put in Boaster, for example, let's say him, most successful IGL for a long
Hmm.
time, would they actually? He's individually worse than any player he replaces
Hmm.
mechanically. We can say that
Hmm.
without being toxic,
I think he would
Just
agree with you.
these guys are incredible. They're guys that
Yeah.
are unbelievable. I feel like they would perform better. Now,
Yeah.
there is some questions to say that PaperRex has their own style. So if you put those four players into this style now, like into like Boasters IGLing, maybe it wouldn't work. That is true because they've been playing this way for 3 years. But let's say beginning of PaperRex, the 1 year they got
Yeah.
good, like the in Iceland.
Hmm.
If you gave them early on an IGL, I think they would have won a championship by now. That's just my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
The balance is not there. And I think every year from now, it's going to matter more and more. Like to me, when I watch Sentinels play, I saw a lot of mid rounding from Zelsis, which I think helped John QT perform individually better
Hmm.
because he could like put some work into Zelsis. You call this like his mid rounding, so I can focus on my aim. Zelsis has got me. I focus on my aim. I can now shoot. That's what this allows. This thing. But then you have people like Boaster and Fnatic, where Boaster does most of the team decisions. He doesn't shoot, but then four people are shooting for him. So it's balanced. It works out both ways.
Right.
In Europe, I think the mistake was we were trying to make pure IGLs out of people who would be great mid rounders or great early rounders. I would keep these players on these teams, honestly, but I would just add like a mid rounder. Now, tier 2 is a problem because if you're a mid rounder or an early round caller in tier 2, you're kind of wasting your time thinking about the game rather than just getting stats and getting into tier 1. Because in Europe, you get into tier 1 by stats mostly.
I mean, that's also almost like fans driving team decisions, right? You're like,
Yeah,
oh, this player's insane because they're dropping 30 bombs every game, and you're like, okay, that doesn't actually reflect on as much as their individual skill as maybe their team is enabling it. I had this conversation with some people about C9 this season, right?
yep.
C9, everyone's like, Oxy is too good. His team sucks. Like he needs a new team. All this stuff. Like if you look at Oxy, his stats are incredible, but why is he getting all these kills? Like, people Zeppa's baiting for him. People are flashing him in. They're getting him into positions to kill people. It's not that he's
Yeah.
going in solo and just murdering everybody. Like it's
It's the
really hard
one
to go
thing
off.
we can't measure.
Yeah.
In basketball, it's easy to measure.
Right.
If you're a ball hog, you can just say he's a ball hog.
Mhm.
So you can explain his numbers by him being a ball hog. In Valorant, there is such a thing to me as a ball hog. For
Yeah.
example, I have played with duelists who their sound B, I'm running B.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
someday I'm running it. They're running to the kills left and right. They're not. And then there's duelists. To me, one of the reasons I love Dirk so much. I feel like he does balance of everything. For example, as a duelist, you can take an angle, a deep angle, and just stay there the whole round and tell your team, guys, I have an angle, rotate. Your teams are
Yeah.
now going to be the ones getting kills. You're just holding an angle, making sure that you have deep information. So if they come back to you, your team is fast enough to rotate. You will not get any kills. Like you're not going to get kills like this. So there is this type of doing it, or you can just like run around left and right, be a ball hog, but you can't measure this in Valorant that much, like objectively, because in sport you have a number.
That's
He had the
yeah.
ball for this many seconds.
That's why actually I love Durka's Yoru play because that agent just enables him to do so much with the TP. Like it's such a different type of duelist because he can lurk, he can push up, he can flash himself, he can TP back to the team. Like he does so much with that agent. It's crazy. Information with his clone, like yeah, I see that because like a lot of people were also flaming Icy from G2 this last year, because his stats, like if you look at him compared to Zekin, you compare him to a lot of the tier one duelists, and like, oh, he's not as good. But the reason G2 won was because he didn't do too much. He did his job.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
expect a very specific like quality of output from him. That's what he delivered. They can win off of that. If you put someone like a superstar out there like Osboss or Ye or something like that, they probably don't get that same quality of what he was giving to the team. It's really hard to say that the team would be better or worse. It's not
Yeah.
just fragging. It's not like, oh, I dropped 10 extra kills, I'm a better player. It's like, well, he also didn't give up space very much. He didn't die. He was winning pistol rounds for them. Like, there's so much else that a player can bring to a team outside of stats. I really think it's skewed. And it also speaks to orgs not actually knowing how to scout people, like not players, but people, right? Like, if you don't know how to construct your team, how can you effectively scout players for that team?
Yeah, I mean, I just think to me, I love basketball. I watch basketball like all the time.
Mhm.
I look at how they make teams because to me, basketball is a very similar sport to VALORANT, and it sounds crazy to say, but to me, it
No,
fully
it
is.
make it actually makes total
Because
sense. Like, the more
you
you
have
talk
like
about it.
the roles on basketball to the roles to like Valorant are
Yeah,
not same. Like you can't
yeah,
have five people shooting the ball at the same time. You just
right.
can't. There's no five balls. There's one ball. So like the support players, the vet players, the passers, whatever. It kind of goes similar to like the initiators, flashers. Like it's similar.
Yeah.
And what I saw is like it developed. For example, I don't know too much about NFL. I'm not gonna lie. It's for me that's a different country sport. But Tom Brady was not scouted very well, right? Like that's the only thing I know. He was 200 pick because his
199.
intangibles
Yeah.
were not 199. He was not talked about. His intangibles, right?
Yeah.
They were not talked about. I believe at least that after Tom Brady, more people like him got scouted. More
Yes.
like
Yep.
kind of like him who had the intangibles. I think the same problem we're having with IGLs. You will rather. This is the truth. This is the one thing I will say, which is a bit bad to say, but I don't care at this point. A lot of coaches will rather take a good individual player and teach them to IGL because they believe they can IGL as coaches, but they can't IGL. They're coaches.
Right.
IGLing and coaching is a different fucking job. Being able to call on the spot and do these things and have all is different. Watching, every time I watch a game, I know what the correct call is. When I'm playing, I don't. That's for me as well. Like I think my percentage in calling goes up by like 3 times if I'm just watching. Because you're not playing. You have so much more space. It's like,
Right.
when you watch
Right.
somebody play, you
Yeah.
know what they're supposed to do. When you're playing, you're so lost. So,
Well,
anyways,
yeah, it's like it's all the fans who like watch a pro game and they're like, "Oh, why are they doing that?" We all know
yeah,
it's
yeah,
wrong, but at the same time, you're like, you're not in the game. You don't have that
yeah,
stress. You don't have. You're lacking information. Like there's so much
yeah.
other stuff.
So I think right now, especially in Europe, a coach would rather take an individual player and
Mm-hmm.
teach them to IGL, and they don't know how to IGL. They're not fucking IGLs, these coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than taking an IGL who knows how to IGL and helping them improve their individual level. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the mistake that we're making in Tier 2, by far. There's like 3 IGLs that I would say in Tier 2 are good enough, IGL-wise, to be in Tier 1, or more than good enough to be in Tier 1. Their individual is not that good. Take him, and help him improve his individual level. Like, isn't that like the simpler way? But no, no, no. These coaches think they know how to IGL because they understand calling from watching it. So they take a really good player. They're like, I'll teach him how to IGL. I will explain that if there is this reveal, of course you should call this and this. And then these players become so fucking like a protocol, like a book.
Yeah.
Like we had a team on C9, by the way, which we knew, and it's funny because I know they know, by the way, because I spoke to them. 1 minute 30 seconds, they drone here. If drone sees this, they go here. If drone doesn't see anything, they go here. We knew it. We were laughing. We had this written down what they do. We were laughing. We just like went left or right depending on the drone. We were laughing at them. But this poor guy who was the IGL at the time, I feel bad for him. It's not his fault. But the coach was probably telling him how to IGL. He was a very good individual player. The coach was telling him how to IGL. He was IGL like that. Like we were winning games. He was shooting, but we were just destroying them. And like this is the problem where right now all the coaches think they can IGL and they are teaching people to IGL instead of teaching people individual. I think
Yeah.
Valorant is missing individual coaches. I worked while I was in Turkey, the best individual region by far. Nobody comes close to Turkey mechanically,
Hmm.
individually.
We're seeing
Like
well, we see some of it today now, like Woot and all that. Like all
everybody.
these random Turkish players are
Out
incredible.
there is in Tramps, there was more Turkish players than European players, by
Yeah.
the way. Because you have 5 footballist players, one guy on Fnatic, 2 guys on Heretics,
Mm-hmm. All
and
of
that's all.
Foot.
That's all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all of. Those are 3 best teams. That more are Turkish than not.
Yeah.
And when I was in Turkey, I had a guy helping me individually, and I was like, why don't more people do this? Like you're IGL, you give him a coach to help him individually. Your other players, you do VOD review to help their individual mistakes on like a macro level, on like team mistakes. That's so logical. But in Valorant, no, no, no. Every coach is somebody who's almost like an IGL who's too old now, so now they're coaching,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them are incredible. I'm not saying they're not, but like they don't understand the difference between like teaching somebody to IGL and just improving somebody individually. MC to me, one of the things that I think he was great at is he made players individually better. Like Drake under MC looked 3 times better than afterwards. We can all
Yeah.
say that publicly. I love Drake; he's a good friend of mine, but he looked. MC knew how to get more out of him individually.
Yeah.
If more coaches knew this, IGLs would improve a lot more, and you would be picking IGLs from tier two, teaching them how to improve individually, rather than everybody's an IGL now. If
Right.
you have decent stats and you have good comms, oh, I'm gonna teach you the IGL. It makes no sense. If every coach I tell this to, when they think about it, they know it's true. I've not gotten an argument on this. Everybody's trying to teach somebody to IGL instead of getting the tier 2 IGLs, trying them out, and then trying to help them individually.
Yeah, it's
It's a
really
clear
funny.
path.
It's really funny because you're describing IGLing as a skill that players have developed over years on their own, and that's something they can bring to the team, right? Versus, I think a lot of coaches or a lot of fans at least, a lot of the community views aim as something that the player just has or doesn't have, and that's
Yeah,
actually the mechanical part you can teach. It's super easy to teach someone to play gunfights differently. It's super easy to teach them to like, like the mechanics and all that stuff. It's really hard to teach someone to be creative at speed. Like speed chess is way
yeah,
you take
yeah.
from the best chess players in the world to put them in speed chess, it's a different game. You know?
I agree.
You
I think IGLing is like the biggest thing that you need talent for,
yeah.
by far.
Yeah.
Mechanic, there is talent for you to be top one, but to be good enough for tier one, it's taught. For me, I realized where my individual level was lacking in Turkey, because these Turkish players were unbelievable. I was lacking like footwork. Let's call
Mm.
it that. Like in basketball, I was
Like
lacking
movement.
footwork.
Yeah.
I had good aim. If I go Kovacs, if I go MS, my aim is good. If I go deathmatch, my aim is good. Like just as good as anybody else. If you test my reaction time, by the way, we tested it on Cloud9, on every team I was on. I
Yeah.
was top two on reaction time, always. But in game, I feel slow, for example, right? So there must be a reason why my reaction time, like pure reaction time, is a lot faster than most players, but in game it's not. So I just realized my movement was bad. I was easy to kill, so I would just get killed faster. I would just not have enough time to react. I was giving myself less time to react. So this coach was explaining me how to
Mm.
individually improve my movement, like how I'm supposed to stand,
Yeah.
what angles, whatever. And in 2 months, it all makes sense, and I've been improving it ever since, and I see incredible improvement on it. But why didn't somebody tell me that before? And like,
Yeah.
why isn't like even for example, Bolster? I still believe one of the best IGLs in the game. He now plays Kovacs and stuff, which I've heard. He talks about it. He needs coaching, not aim coaching. He needs an individual coach, which don't exist in the game. He needs
Right.
somebody to sit with him, to ring ranked and tell him, why did you pick like that? You should have crouch peeked into him. You should have wide swung. You should have jiggled, then peeked. In basketball, when I played basketball, every time I took a shot, there would be a coach who would drag me by my hand aggressively and be like, your footwork here, your ankle wasn't turned enough, so you actually couldn't make a whole move around, so you were blocked here.
You're
And I
talking
was like,
about you're
oh, that
talking
makes
about
sense.
technique
Yeah,
coaching. Yeah.
footwork.
Yeah.
Like literally footwork would translate to Valorant one to one. Somebody needs to teach you the footwork. What I believe talent is some of these players have the footwork by accident.
Mhm.
They just they just learn the game with correct footwork. Some
Mhm.
people learn the game with wrong footwork. They need to be retaught. And this is what the coaches are for, in just my opinion, to improve this. So I think Valorant right now really misses individual coaches, and I also think if you're a coach who knows individual level, if you're an ex-player, I don't know why more coaches don't advertise themselves as an individual coach. I think there's a very big market. If
Yeah.
you advertise yourself as an individual coach, you reach out to a player like Bolster, you improve him in 2 months, which is very easy to do in my opinion. It will show. You then go to other teams, other coaches. You'll get offers. It's also like something I thought about doing for a second, because I was like, there's a big gap here for like coaching, specifically like individual coaching. Name me one individual coach. Name me one guy who you can tell me that
Well,
his job is improving players like fully individually.
there's a lot of people who I think say they do that, but it's always from a ranked competitive solo queue perspective. They're
Yeah,
trying to,
yeah. Not
yeah,
yeah,
challenge ranked players. But I see what you're saying because, yeah, you look at certain players in pro and mechanically they look different. They move
yeah,
better. Their just utility usage is better. And you're like, oh, it was such a smart use of util. But it's like, okay, it was smart because now it makes sense. But why isn't everyone doing that? Like the util is the util. Everyone knows how to play this agent. Like it,
yeah,
it should be just a normalized thing. I do think with time that players see other players do stuff and they pick it up. But you're right. If there's someone who's specialized in taking that stuff and applying it directly to the player, teaching them how to do it in an actionable way, it'd be way more efficient than a player randomly seeing tens do something with Omen and be like, oh, I can do that. And then they
yeah.
try it. Like,
Yeah, I mean, my goal once I go tier one, hopefully everything else turns out the way I think it will with my hard work. I will tell my org to get an individual coach, and I
Mhm.
don't care if it's not that good. I want a head coach, normal like the way Valorant is now. I want a coach on the side that's there for all
Yeah.
the players after scrims to say, the reason you died here, like there is no way you're jiggling this angle. He's on this angle. He has an op. He knows this. You shouldn't do that.
Right.
There's no way you play this 1v1 like this. There's no way you play this 1v2 like this. I want from now on. I do think in a few years it's gonna happen. But everything happens the same way. By the way, one team does it, everybody copies. I'll give you an
Yep.
example. Karen comes from academy. Now Riot allows academy teams. You saw the announcement, and now there's gonna be a bunch of academy teams. Why? Karen came from academy. Genji made an academy. DRX made an academy, and they look a lot better. Everybody's gonna copy. EG, for example, it's also why people are gonna copy academy because of the EG success of last year.
Mhm.
Last year's teams wanted to do it. They just didn't have the money to have a full new roster, secondary roster
Yeah.
to pay minimum wage. They didn't have the money. But from this year, you'll see it. So
You,
people will copy this. Once one team has an individual coach and they do well, everybody's gonna have an individual coach.
you know
I bet.
what's really frustrating though is that this stuff is not new, right? League, the reason, okay, do you know why Gen G and T1 created academy teams? That's how they got their success in League of Legends, right?
No.
And what are they basing that on? Well, that's how every single professional sport in the world does scouting and talent development. They have academy teams. Soccer, football, tennis, well, not tennis because it's individual, but like basketball, baseball, they all have farming systems in order to cultivate talent, develop it, and then promote people into the main team. Like that's how you do
Yeah.
it. And for decades, esports has decided it's just not doable. Like the LCS has gone backwards, right? League of Legends has gone backwards. They've gotten rid of academy teams. They had
Yeah,
them
I heard.
and they got rid of them.
Yeah.
And so I'm really hoping that, unfortunately, the reason I bring up league is because a lot of these same organizations are also the same orgs that own their league teams. They're probably thinking of it the same way. And I think it's a mistake. And I think it's going to kill tier two. It's going to kill their ability to stay on top. The worst thing that can happen is if challenger teams start outpacing VCT teams regularly, what's the point of VCT teams even having the funding budget? All that at that point, they should just make it a 20 team league, top 10, bottom 10, and then you have promotion relegation like in Premier League,
Yeah.
right? Just
Yeah.
just do that. And then it actually drops the relative cost for every org. Because right now a lot of orgs are frustrated that, oh, we paid $20 million. We should get more out of this. But it's like you can't justify that if you're losing to tier two teams constantly, like or Ascension teams.
Yeah.
So one of the scariest thing I think for VCT Americas is if next year, let's say M80 wins, they come in, and next stage two, it's like G2 and M80 are the two best teams in Americas. That's gonna really devalue the point of VCT. Like you can't have tier two teams dumpstering your main teams. Otherwise, what are all these teams doing? Like
Yeah. No, I mean it's true.
yeah.
There's nothing to say. I mean, it's completely true. I mean, I just wish that more sport people were involved into esports. It feels like a bunch of gamers got hired to make esports, rather than like
That's a
I
hot.
studied.
This is a
Yeah,
controversial topic now because most esports people say we need less non-esports people in esports, and I agree with the intent of that. We need less business people in esports in
yeah,
terms of
business. Yeah,
like
yeah,
ruining orgs, ruining all this stuff. But I do think that the performance side, the sports performance side,
yeah,
the psychology side, the team building side, that stuff is stuff that was figured out 100 years ago.
yeah,
Like traditional sports is already done all this 100 years ago, and humans don't change. Humans are humans. The sports psychology is consistent. There's a reason why the best teams in the world have sports psychologists who come from traditional sports backgrounds. They're implementing theories and they're implementing ideas and concepts that have been discovered over 100 years of competitive sports. It's
yeah,
not esports is different. The
yeah.
mindset doesn't change. Especially,
That's why I think.
I love your comparison. I think basketball is actually a very good one-to-one comparison because when you even think about, oh yeah, everybody has a gun, everybody shoots, but not everybody shoots. The duelist doesn't get the entry kill blind swinging in, right? Like
No.
somebody has to set it up. You
But
have to hit.
even if he does, even if there are teams who, like, for example, one guy will just contact and get a kill, but
Yeah,
he's the only one contacting. The other guys have to be hold. They can't have one guy contacting here, one guy contacting here, two people contacting here. That doesn't
yeah,
exist. It's
yeah,
always one guy contacting. That's fine. The other guys are just ready to react to this information.
yeah.
So to me, it's similar to basketball also because the worst team can win. In basketball, in the
Mhm.
season, if you check, the worst team wins a lot because if you look at like stats, if you shoot a 40% on a three-pointer, one day statistically you're gonna shoot a 50 or a 60. It's gonna happen.
Mhm.
You're gonna overshoot. You're gonna win a game. Valorant is the same. A worst team can win because individually they just shoot better. That they have a 45% headshot that game. To me, it's very similar. Where like in basketball, Steph Curry can come from half court, do the wrong decision by every
Shoot
analytic
it. Yeah.
ever, but they win.
Yeah.
Same thing in Valorant, you will have players like Something or like
Yeah.
Voot or
Yeah.
like Demon One who are so much better individually, like shooting wise, that they can just make wrong analytical decision
Mhm.
and win you the round. So it's to me very similar to that because it's kind of similar where it just goes back and forth of like shots.
Yeah.
It's similar, and even the way you build teams is similar. The coaching should be similar, by the way. I don't know why there's no. I've always believed. I always wanted two coaches. One to take care of defense, one to take care of attack. Always.
Yeah.
Because if I can have one coach only for defense for the rest of their life, only for defense games,
Yeah.
understand what you need to defend, you would be like you would have 8 rounds on average on defense. You have a guy on attack doing the same fucking thing. You would win every. You just
This.
perfection. You have an
Oh my
IGL.
gosh.
He gets why?
This actually
Why
makes
isn't
so
there one?
much sense. You're right, because like the prep work for defense when you're on attack side versus the defense side, it's completely different how you look at the map. So why would you put all of that work on the same people? Like it doesn't make sense.
That's why IGLs make a mistake. For example, I see a lot of IGLs on defense. They call, let's do a 1-3-1 and let's fast rotate left and right. It's a very simple call. We play 1-3-1. If they go B, we rotate B. If they go A, it's the most
Mhm.
simple call ever. Then they call the same on attack because technically it works. You do 1-3-1. Let's go. Yeah, I just think there should be more roles in Valorant. That's all. More
Yeah.
like same as in sports. You have individual coaches, defense, attack, head coach, assistant coach. You don't have to have all five. You don't have to have all five. But I don't know why there isn't people specializing in these things. And the reason people don't want to specialize, by the way, makes sense. Imagine you're a good coach and you out of
Mhm.
nowhere say, "I'm gonna be an attacker coach." Who's gonna offer you? Because it doesn't exist anymore. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
You really have to get lucky for that, like everything to happen in a way for that to.
I mean, even if they just had a 2 or 3-part coaching staff, right? Let's say right now the common team construction is a head coach and assistant coach. If the head coach just takes over attack side and the assistant coach is primarily focused on defense and player coaching, you have a little bit of division there. But that requires both the head coach and the assistant coach to be in agreement on that, and one has to be better at one than the other, right? Because why would you get someone to coach defense side unless they're significantly better at coaching defense, or they're more defensive minded about the game? And you see that a lot with certain teams. Certain teams attack side on a map is just absolutely insane, and then they just can't defend, and vice versa. And so certainly somebody on that team is thinking about the map differently than a lot of other people. And
Yeah,
like that's what you
and
have to identify.
that's why academy teams are gonna be great because if
Yeah.
I'm a team and my defense is awful, I would go against my academy team and just play defense. Play fucking 60 rounds of defense, man, until you prove that. Right now,
Mhm.
how do you practice? Like we practice wrong in esports. You go and you play another team,
I
and they
oh
do.
you
They're trying to win. They're trying to win. You're trying to practice.
you're
Next game, you're trying to win. They're
you're
trying to
going
practice. You
yeah,
know?
this is a battle I've been fighting for like 5 years, that scrim results don't matter. People need to stop and I don't mean like, oh, it doesn't matter because it doesn't mean you're better or worse. I'm saying that teams need to stop prioritizing winning in scrims. They need to
Yeah.
prioritize learning. They need to prioritize like what is the actual goal of the scrim is to improve, right? Like so many teams will come into tournaments like, oh, we're smashing everyone in scrims. We're gonna do great. And it's like, yeah, it's good for your confidence, but like how much practice are you getting when you 13-2 some team like over and over? Like
Yeah.
you're not learning anything.
And
Like
the other team starts playing worse because when
yeah.
they're getting shat on, they start like running it down
They
more. So
troll,
then you,
yeah.
yeah.
So I've
Yeah.
always said academy teams need to exist because you need to be able to scrim and make it meaningful, and you also need to run situational drills. I think CS:GO does this better than any other esport right now. They run
Yeah.
situational drills all the time, and a lot of pro players in Valorant who came from CS, they bring that to them too. Like on C9, when Zeta was on the team, him and I believe it was Nathan, him or someone of those two, they would sit in the practice tool and they would just practice lineups. And one guy would sit at one end of the map, the other guy would sit at the other, and they would just practice doing things like that all day after scrims
Yeah.
because that's how you learn things. And so they'd always say, like, if we could run 5v5 and have it be situated, like you're saying, what if you only practice your pistol rounds, only practice your early rounds over and over and over and over?
I did that with the team. I
Yeah.
did that even when it was an academy. I offered a tier one team to do that, and their pistol rounds improved. We only did pistols for like 40 minutes,
Yeah. Which is
and their
good.
pistol rounds improved. Yeah, I mean, this
That's
makes
really
sense.
good. You could also do blitz scrims, like so some in league, right? Like, what if you only play the entry? So you play the game, but every round you only play the first 3 minutes. You know, you're only playing that initial contact, initial entry. How do you play
Yeah,
off? And then you adjust your call. Do it again. You know, you practice the entries against an actual team. But then if you're gonna do that, you can't look at the results. You can't be like, oh yeah, we 13 forward them. Like we're better. Like it doesn't matter, you know? I think more teams need across every esport, but especially in Valorant, there's so much potential for that kind of stuff. But you need to have the organization you're talking about. You have to have one, a team that's willing to do it, right? Either you and another team, but that's actually that's less effective because inherently they're going to get something out of it too, which is they get to see what you're trying to do. And eventually you're going to have to play them. So I've always
yeah,
said that scrimming enemy opponent teams in your region is just not a good idea long term. That's not how
yeah. A
you
lot
get
of
the
teams
best
don't do
practice.
it.
Yeah.
Fnatic doesn't prac anybody, bro. Fnatic only plays like tier 3 teams at this point.
Yeah.
They just like they make sure nobody can leak and all these things.
Which is
It gets
good,
complicated.
but it does I understand that a lot of players don't wanna do that because they feel like mechanically they're not being challenged
Yeah,
as
yeah.
much.
There's a lot. There's no correct answer, and there never will be
Yeah.
in esports. I think with the way the game works, but I just think academy. Once teams have academy and it works, and they develop it properly, because those are academies, like you just say academy and it's not developed properly.
Right.
Once people make academies where the academy players will go up to the main roster, like in CS, man, CS has figured some things out. I have to respect them. Like I
Mhm.
don't like a lot of things about CS,
Mhm.
but the way like the academy system works, I see a lot of players going up.
Mhm.
I see a lot of players getting sold. You see people like Monosea as a prime example, and on top of that, I feel like they're a lot better at the game. Like I feel like when I watch CS, those people are really good, and it's not accidental. Like
No.
for example, CS has retakes. Like you go on a retake server, not anymore with CS2, but until now, retake servers. And if you're a team who's bad at retaking, your coach is gonna tell you, go on a custom server, play retakes for fucking 2 hours a day, bro. Like you're shit. For example, pistol deathmatch. If you're bad at pistols, your coach is gonna tell you go play headshot only on with pistols. There's a server. In Valorant, you don't have this, so we do need to get more creative.
Yeah.
The question is, who's gonna be the first one to get creative? Which tier 2 is going to help the tier 1 team improve? And there's a lot of questions like this. But to me, the main problem which I would fix, because it's a bit more personal, can be please, for the love of God, just try out tier 2 IGLs and improve them individually rather than just trying to get good individual players and make them IGLs. Unless they already show some of the intangibles of an IGL. Like, for example, I think you can make Zelsis into an IGL
Sure.
in 1 or 2 years more, you can make him mature. He has intangibles. He's a leader.
Yeah.
He can mid round, and he's individually decent. So now you only need to teach him to early round call, knowing that his individual is gonna fall off. That's the truth. You can do that because he needs one thing. But I see some ideals. They don't have the leader aspect.
Mhm.
They don't have the mid rounds. They only have the early rounds and individual. 2 out of 4 is not good enough. You're not gonna make him. You have to wait for him in 3 4 years time when now he develops something else, like for example an early rounder with some time he might develop leadership, and now he has a leadership, he has the early rounds, and he has individual. So now you teach him to mid round, his individual will drop off, of course, but you make an ideal out of him. But you're skipping 2 steps. So many of these in Europe, every like half these teams skip 2 steps. And by the way, I didn't even mention technically last year, listen to this, Liquid had Enzo, incredible player, by the way. I think like again, it's not the player's fault.
Mhm.
It's just the system of Valorant. Enzo, mid-year, or not mid-year, last 3 games, they switched to not IGLing, by the way. It was announced, so I'm not leaking anything, it was announced. Koi started with Stark's IGLing, mid-year switched to Shadow IGLing. Um, and then Giants had Redguard IGLing, and then they kicked him, and they had somebody else IGL. So like all of them ended up switching to IGLs, and they're still probably gonna make the same mistake. That's all
Yeah.
I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
They're still gonna make the same
I mean,
mistake.
every team that switched IGLs this last year in America has struggled, right? Like when they swapped the IGL out. So even like Sadak going the other way, where he was IGLing and he went to Duelist, that team could not function.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you could
they
see
tried.
it. It's not just, oh, call the shots. It's like he's still on the team, but he couldn't call because he was playing Neon, playing Duelist and stuff. And the team just looked completely lost. They went from like one of the better teams in the league, and Lad looked like trash at the end of the stage. They looked terrible. And they started winning again when they put him back as IGL, but it was already too late. It was like your guys' record doesn't even let you move on. So like it definitely speaks to the fact that it's not a skill you just pick up by getting coached. I think you're right. It's more of a talent because you not only have to know the play, you have to be able to read the situation, you have to do it very quickly. You also have to do it under pressure, and you have to do it with varying amounts of information. That's not something everyone can do.
And confidence, because if your call isn't
Yeah.
confident, like sounding wise, there's a lot of things. I mean, my only thing is once I go tier one, which as I said I will do, I
Mhm.
will definitely push. Like this is gonna be good, so I'm saying this early on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I can
Clip
say that I've
this.
been saying this for a while. I'm going to push for people to establish roles more that like he's a controller who is also a mid rounder. He is a sentinel who calls really well early round. I want these descriptions of players, man. I ask people how this player is. They say, okay, he makes good, decent decisions and he has a decent name.
So what we need is like those like, FIFA like player cards with like the stats,
Basically,
like the bars, and
basically,
like realistically, I think that's actually a really good idea, but in order to generate that, you have to have some way of measuring those things. So we need to have also stuff like scouts and coaches need to be putting that stuff together on spreadsheets for themselves and building out these databases of players. And you can combine it with stats, analytics, and also just eyeball tests, right? Like you can't judge someone's leadership capability except by
yeah.
rating it from other people, essentially. Like,
Yeah, I mean, it's not gonna
yeah,
be perfect like in basketball. As I said, like
yeah,
you can't say I have the ball 70% of the game in Valorant, even though you can say a duelist is a ball hog, which people don't even have
mhm,
the term. But like, I do believe like we're not at that step yet. That's
yeah,
like taking 3 steps ahead. At least in the next 3 years or 2 years, I want ideal early rounder, mid rounder.
yeah,
And teams build around that. You can't have an ideal and a proper mid rounder at the same time. Your individual level is not good enough. Like these type of things need to be set out, and like players need to develop when they're young. In tier two, a coach should see this guy seems to have good early round calls. I'm going to push him to learn and watch a bit of odds on early rounding so he can improve that. So maybe a team will pick him up as a sentinel or as a sentinel plus early rounder because players need to be that. Like players develop, like in basketball, for example, before only like the short guys shot from 3 pointer. Slowly everybody starts shooting from the 3 pointer, right? So the sport develops,
yeah,
like it just develops. It's normal. But in like I'm not saying like we're that steps ahead, but like we need to have these roles, man. Like we do not
yep,
have these like it's just the guy who doesn't shoot good, he has to ideal. That's like the rule. And when
yeah,
a player is going individually down, they put him on ideal.
yeah.
That's Valorant right now. That's all it is. Player starts individually going down, he's the ideal. Instead of saying, hey, let's coach him back up, or hey, you know what I mean? There's so many things.
Yeah, pretty that's actually such a good point. It's just not how you should be viewing the position at this point. That might have worked 4 years ago when Valorant was new, because nobody was really that good yet. But I think that's also one of the problems is you're gonna see a lot of that with teams that, like PaperRex to go back to them. I think their best chance to win a championship was 3 years ago, 2 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah,
Because
no,
now
it's never happening again.
it's gonna get harder and harder and harder because teams keep getting better and they're always going to have this ceiling. And I think they're near their ceiling because you can only get so far with
Yeah,
insane mechanics and then, a good team chemistry. Like eventually they're not going to be able to compete at the very highest level because they can't adapt as quickly. There's not gonna
yeah,
be that speed because they have to have so much other information flow to get across to 5 players, whereas a really organized team can take information from that round and right away process it and be like, "One person makes this call, and we just do it." The
yeah,
speed. Like, EDG was incredible to watch this end of champs. Like, that finals they played was it looks like my girlfriend would say, "Oh, it looks chaotic." Like, it's chaos, but if you look at how organized it is, it's the speed. Like they make a call and all 5 players are on the same page and they just execute. It was crazy. Like I think, Asia's obviously that's a whole different conversation, but Asia is gonna be very, very scary in the next couple of years.
yeah. I
Um,
mean,
they're ahead of
the
schedule.
the last thing I could say just easily is every year a team with an ideal wins, like a pure ideal. Every
Yeah.
year it's happened. We go from Fnatic to FPX, like Navi, whatever,
Mhm,
to Optic with FNS,
mhm.
to
EG, yeah.
EG with EG had a bit I know. So for example, this is my out. I don't know enough about the team.
Yeah.
Just from the outside, Ethan was mid rounding a lot. Boostio was early rounding a lot, and he was
Mhm,
the leader.
mhm.
So he was doing the three intangibles. I was saying three.
Yeah.
He was good individually. If you remember, Boostio was actually shooting for an
A
ideal.
and
You know what I'm saying? He's
Com's late round is incredible. Like
yeah,
his communication late round, like they had such it was funny because ironically, I was talking to Com today in his stream about that EG roster, and he's like, "We had the perfect team." He's like, "Our chemistry was unbreakable. We loved playing together." He's like, "Honestly, if we kept that roster together for a couple, we probably could have won more events." Like that was he's like
yeah, I would
that
believe it. Yeah,
yeah, playing on the team, he's like, it was perfect. There's no complaints about anything. Like
yeah,
I'm like, I can see why, because nobody thought they were going to be good on an individual level, right? People were
Yeah.
flaming EG when they put Demon 1 in. They
I
said
mean, I
this is the
remember.
they said this is the biggest mistake you guys have ever made. You subbed out BCJ. Demon 1's a nobody. Like he's a ranked player.
Yeah.
Who cares? The guy was insane, but he had to be in the
But
right situation. Like
yeah, and even BCJ wasn't the problem. BCJ is an
no,
incredible
he's
initiator, but
he's
it's just
doing
like
great right now. Yeah, with M80,
yeah,
like
the bar wasn't filled properly. It
right,
wasn't balanced. That's all. Demon One gave them that firepower. He
right.
increased their firepower. You have BCJ, not BCJ. Sorry, you have deep. I forgot the Boostio.
Ibusia, yeah.
Boostio, early round calling mostly on Sentinel
Mhm,
and performing individually. Ethan was mid rounding a lot from what I can see from the outside,
mhm.
and he was able to perform. So he kept like they were all just averaged out, like
Right,
perfectly averaged out.
right.
So they didn't have. They're one of the only teams that I believe who won, but didn't have the pure IGL like Booster or like Angel. But he's still an IGL. Like with all due respect, he's fully an IGL.
Yeah.
He's the only like kind of not the best example.
But to that point too, when Ethan became an IGL for NRG this last year, it didn't look good
Yeah, because he
because
was a
they
mid rounder.
expected him to do all of it, and it was like,
Yeah,
yeah, he couldn't even get Demon 1 going. Like people were saying, oh, Demon 1 fell off. If you watch his shots, the guy did not fall off. He's just in
yeah.
situations he can't win. Like
Yeah, and maybe there's even like the difference of like he needs the energy, maybe Booster helps with the
right,
energy. Like
right.
you need all of that. Like to me, you need energy,
Hmm.
you need a leader. Like you need to balance it out, and like you can do the Sentinels route, but like your IGL doesn't have to be the one screaming and yelling and jumping.
No.
For example, Booster he brings energy. From what I can
Hmm.
see, he's the funny one on the team,
Yeah.
brings energy up or whatever. Heretics, Boo is like doesn't bring the energy. He doesn't
No.
have to. He's a leader.
Mhm.
He's an IGL, like he does everything. You have Benji Fishy
Benji
being
Fishy.
the
Yeah.
bringing up. So
Yeah.
you need the energy. You
Yeah.
need the energy. You need the mid rounding, the early rounding, the leadership, and like those four.
Yeah.
So how you balance them on a team? Like Boostio carries the energy. Boostio carries the early rounding. Boostio carries half mid rounding. That's what Boostio does. Like he's actually like probably the most balanced IGL out of all of them. Like
Hmm.
actually probably the most balanced. Him and Boo are the two most balanced IGLs, I believe.
Yeah.
And Valen actually. Valen is full balance. Like
Valen's crazy. That man.
I know
That
Valen like personally, and I asked the players because when I was on the guards, and
yeah.
I will say this publicly, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
He wasn't mid rounding that much, by the way, on the guards. He
Yeah.
actually wasn't mid rounding back in the day when he was a kid. He wasn't mid rounding. Net, Trent, they were all mid rounding. He was early round calling. Defense was called a lot by Net, by
Hmm.
Michael.
Hmm.
But slowly he's developed calling in everything. Now when I asked them, because I asked them like how has he improved, because I care for them, like
Yeah.
really they're good
Yeah.
friends of mine. They told me like, bro, you can't even imagine. His mid rounding is unbelievable now. He still calls early round really well, like he used to,
Hmm.
and now he's the voice of the team. Before it was Drona, I think he was like the oldest one in the beginning of the team.
Hmm.
Now they're saying that Valen is a pure leader of the team. Like Valen is by far the most balanced idea right now. Not even close actually.
No,
He brings
he
energy.
yeah.
He brings everything. He's the most balanced.
He deserved the IGL of the Year award. Like he played so well and called such good games. Like he's the reason G2 did what they were able to do. Like I mean,
Yeah,
there's
I agree.
they have some really good players, but individually, you look like okay, you take any one of those players, put them on a different team. Is that team significantly better with that one player? No, it's like as a whole, like the Icy thing. Like Icy isn't going to top the charts on any duelist ranking, but what he brought to that team fit so well with what they were trying to do. Like they looked fantastic. They were top
Yeah,
two, most of the year, and then they took top four at champs. Like that's you can't ask for a better performance from an Ascension team. Like,
yeah.
but they
It's
also have
because
a
of
really,
Josh, man.
yeah. I was gonna say Josh, the coach brings so
Yeah,
much to that because, like you said, he has a system. I talked to Josh, and he's like his approach fits with the team, which is what you need. There's that synergy. Like so many
yeah,
teams are also shot in the foot because their coach can't work with the type of players that he has. Like, you
yeah. I
put
mean,
Josh, you put, I guarantee you put Josh on a team like, let's see, like Crew, or you put him on a team like Leviathan where you have superstar players, it's not going to go the same.
yeah.
Like,
Same thing for Ito, by the way. Ito, the
yeah,
Leviathan coach, Ito Pata,
yeah,
the guy made Leviathan like he just revived him
yeah,
mid-year.
yeah,
I'm not saying Goked, like the first coach, I know him. He's
yeah.
not a bad coach at all. He's a great coach.
It's a
Didn't
mismatch
fit the
though.
team.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a mismatch.
yeah,
Itapata came in, unbelievable coach, knows
hmm,
what to do. Bro,
yeah,
like I believe to this day, coaches carry the game. Like
yeah,
one coach can fully carry a team to playoffs or like further or to international events. One coach, like just a coach, can carry a team. Like
sure,
I fully believe it. It's
yeah,
unbelievable how much coaches can carry.
I
And Europe is missing that.
yeah,
All our
wait.
best coaches are in NA. You guys sold them all. You took Bonkar, you took Happy, you took our two best coaches. Two of them. No, I'm not even kidding. Two of them
Yeah.
are in NA. By far, every team in VCT, by the way, I will say this, like everybody wants them. Everybody would love to have them. Like the two best coaches are there, and I think that's the problem with the EMEA. By the way, if you actually think about it, to me, that's the
Yeah.
problem with the EMEA. Because you asked like, why are we kind of going backwards? You took all our coaches, man.
Hmm.
What's up with that?
Well,
Give them
there,
back.
there, there should be opportunity then for some tier two coaches coming up. Like, you got to show what you got, right? Juvenile, right? He also joined Leviathan at the end there with Ido Pata. He got promoted into assistant coach, and he did a lot of work with him. And he's like, yeah, he went from head coaching in tier two into assistant coaching. But it's like I talked to him after champs, and he was saying he wants to find a tier one role, but it's the same issue. Like you're saying with IGLs, you're not going to get a lot of tier one opportunities unless you go to the bottom tier one team. But if you go there, you might doom your career.
Yeah, it's very
It's
complicated.
very complex because if you take the
Yeah,
opportunity to go tier one and you have a bad season, but you have the worst team in the league, it's really hard to change that reputation.
yeah. I mean, I got advice a lot because I had quite a bit of tryouts last year in tier one. I got advice for like some coaches told me like you're good, you're in the right path, but like don't join this team.
Yeah.
They're like you're just gonna
Yeah.
you can go tier one now, possibly like, but they were like it's not even good for you.
I,
Like
I've
just stay in
seen
tier two
it.
for
I've
another
seen it
year.
happen to other players. In league, there was a player who was in academy, and he was the most highly looked at jungler in academy for a year and a half. And he was so tired of being. He's about to be in academy again. And he's like, I don't want to do this. I just want to go. I want to go to LCS. I want to go pro. And so he took an offer on the worst team in the league. He had a terrible season the next season. Never got to play in tier one again. Like he got kicked back down to tier two, tier three even. Like, and he basically just isn't going to get another shot. It's really sad. But I told him, I was like, if you take this spot as a jungler, you are going to struggle because in league, it's like you can't play jungle when you have three losing lanes. You just can't do it, right?
Yeah,
It's like you can't play duelist on a team when your initiators are garbage. Like they're flashing
yeah,
you and stuff. Like
yeah,
you just can't play the game, so you're gonna look bad. And then so everyone's gonna look at your stats and they're like, yeah, this guy's not very good, and you're just not gonna get another shot. So it's really, really hard for a lot of players to sometimes deal with that reality of like, if you don't get the right offer, you shouldn't take it. Don't just take the first offer.
yeah.
Like, not if you want
That's true.
career longevity.
Yeah, that's why I'm gonna play till I'm 35, bro. Watch. Because I'm honestly the only one taking care of my
No,
body.
I'm a
Most of these.
believer. I'm a believer, man. I worked with you at C9 and I know how your thought process, your brain works. I think you can definitely do it. We need people like you in the scene because we need people to actually think. And I think too many
That's true.
orgs, too many people are doing things by what they've always done and there's no thinking. Things don't
Yeah.
even make sense when you put it on paper the way they're doing things sometimes.
Yeah, I've had that happen to a tier one team I talked to. I was
Yeah.
like, describe to me again what you're actually doing. Like, just say it out loud a couple more
Yeah.
times, and then you realize
You're like,
some
this
things
sounds
are like,
stupid.
oh,
Yeah.
we're making the same mistake. Like, I had this happen.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to talk about like how because it was like kind of specific and kind of like put some
Sure.
under the rug. But it's like funny. I was like, think about what you're saying. It's similar to the IGL thing I was telling you about. Like, I was like, okay, you put these tier one IGLs into
Yeah.
tier two, would they perform better individually? And they're like, no. So I'm like, so you see what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Like 1+1. But
This is my
yeah, it's
point
kind
too.
of
Is
like
like
that.
I'm not high ranked, but I've been right more than I've been wrong about how most orgs are going to go preseason. Like more often than
Yeah.
not, every prediction I made is like accurate because I know
There's,
like the people.
yeah,
It's like I know, okay, if you do this, like I knew C9 was gonna struggle this year with Jojo. Like I just knew it. But I
I
can't
knew it too.
explain that to people, Like
I knew it too.
they're
I
like,
knew it
oh,
too. I
you're
knew
you're
everything.
what do you know? You're silver or whatever. Like, yeah, but it's not about me playing the game well. It's like I can see what's happening with this team and I can see what's happening like with the people. It's very obvious to someone who isn't like entrenched in only esports. I think it's because, I've experienced in other areas. Like you can kind of view things from a different perspective. Whereas people who've been in esports their whole lives, they were kids who grew up playing pro and now they're coaches and managers and all that. Like they don't see from the outside anymore. All they see is what they've always seen. And it
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
it
no,
hard.
they're in a bubble. It's a
Yeah.
bubble.
It's
It's
very
a
hard to
bubble. That's
adapt.
all it is.
But all right. I don't mean to keep you too long. I know it's late for you. Thank you so
I'm
much
gonna
for your
go eat.
time, Qpert. Always good to chat. I was telling you I hope to see you again in NA, but
You'll see me one day. Not now. I have to stay here because of my girlfriend. But
sure.
in a few years, when I'm like I'll come there for the money, you know?
Yeah, there you go. Retire in NA.
Yeah,
All right,
I will.
man. Well,
Thank you,
take
man.
care. Best of luck with the off season, and I'll talk to you again soon.
I appreciate you. See you,
All right,
boss.
take care. Bye.